So we'll start by thinking about our interest in this class, why we're here, and trying to intentionally create a very broad, expansive motivation. Thinking not just of our own benefit, but being able to use what we learn to increase our capacity to be of greater and greater benefit to others. Then we'll settle the mind a bit, move into the class with a few minutes of a breathing meditation, but specifically counting the breaths. So we can do the breathing meditation with or without intentionally counting the breaths, but this variation on each exhalation, we'll just mentally think of the number 1 through 10, and then back to 1. So counting just the exhalations, just noting in the mind 1 through 10, back to 1, up to 10 again. So we situate the body first in the posture that we learned last week, a stable position, keeping our feet flat and our back straight, torso open, hands in the lap, right over left, with the palms upturned and the thumbs gently touching. Our eyes are gently closed or very slightly open. Try to avoid slouching or leaning. We just try to concentrate our awareness on the present moment physical sensation of the air passing into and back out of the tip of the nostrils. Trying to notice quickly when anything that isn't that object arises in the mind, and quickly letting go of that distraction, and without judgment or frustration, bringing our attention back to that present moment physical sensation. Again, noting each exhalation, counting it 1 through 10. So we'll do this for 5 minutes.
Okay.
And then when you're ready, we'll come back together. Okay. So, does anyone want to share their experience over the past week with the two meditations, regular breathing meditation and the bare awareness exercise?
Well, I just want to say, was saying that this beginning, I've been meditating for a few years actually, and very seriously in the last year. And this beginning class is so helpful to me at just reinforcing. I wish everybody could experience it because it's really wonderful. It helped me really ground myself at a time of great distractions in the world, in my own life. it just helped to ground and calm me, and having it fresh in my mind. This is what we do, so I had very good experience with the breathing practice in particular, just going back to the beginning, So I really appreciate this class. I'm so glad for it. Thank you.
So we'll start today by talking a little bit about the Buddhist model of the mind, because meditation, of course, the purpose of meditation is to improve our minds, to become familiar with more positive mental states, to reduce the influence of those less positive mental states. And ultimately, Buddhism would say that that process, unlike the process of improving the state of the physical body, the physical body is limited. The physical body being made of flesh and blood and muscle, and we can embark upon a somewhat similar endeavor of eating well, exercising, but there will always be a limit to the benefits that we receive from that. We can only reach a certain level, peak level of physical health, and then kind of the aging process, and that then we can maintain a certain level of health, but there will be a peak that we can reach, and then there will be kind of a natural decline from that peak in any given lifetime. And the mind is different. The mind is not flesh and blood. The mind is a non-physical energy. And so when we embark upon developing or improving, cultivating the mind, there isn't a limit to that. That can be that process of purification, that process of improvement increases, Buddhism would suggest, can increase to the point where we achieve what we would call the state of enlightenment, the highest possible spiritual state. Within that state, whether we can say that there's any kind of further, a Buddha is someone who, a fully awakened being, fully enlightened being, is someone who is both omniscient, meaning that mind is capable of knowing all things, and also we can use the word omnipotent, but we have to kind of redefine it from what it normally means in English. Omnipotent in English has sort of a godlike quality to it, meaning that anything that can be conceived of can be done. Kind of literally could mean all powerful. And we could say, though, that a Buddha's mind is omnipotent, except that we have to understand that when we say that it can do all things, then there are things that cannot be done. So a Buddha cannot do anything that can be imagined, but a Buddha can do anything that is possible to be done. And one important distinction here would be the idea of creating other minds. We might think that, in Christianity and other religious views, the idea of an omnipotent being is a being that can create consciousnesses, that can create sentience. And that is not something that an enlightened being can do, because Buddhism would suggest that simply isn't something that can be done, that the process that creates sentience is a naturalistic process not something that belongs to the sphere of what any being is capable of doing. So we can say that a Buddha can do all things, but only if we define all things as not our imagination, but rather what is possible for a being to actually do. Likewise, an omnipotent being from a different religious view, we could say also could create world systems, could create planets and universes, and a Buddha also can't do that. So we have to say that there are things that are outside the bounds of what a Buddha can do, but within those bounds, anything is possible. So this state of complete awakening is the perfection of any individual consciousness. And it's the goal of historical Buddhist practice. Again, as I mentioned, it may or may not be our goal, but it is the long-term goal of, historical Buddhist practice. And it is empowered by understanding how the mind actually works. The mind itself is said to be that which is has two characteristics, that which possesses clarity and awareness. And clarity here only means that the mind is a non-physical energy, and awareness only means that that non-physical energy, when it is directed toward an object of knowledge, that some internal representation of that external object dawns in the mind of that sentient being. So when we look at something, when we taste something, when we hear something, when we touch something, we get some data about that leaves a sense impression in the mind, and we now have some representation through that process. We may be mistaken in some way, or we may be limited in some way, but there is still some internal representation that takes place when the mind is directed toward that object. And that is what the mind is. It is a energy. It is a formless energy that, when it is directed toward an object of knowledge, generates some internal representation of that object of knowledge, generally mediated, from our perspective on a practical level, mediated through the five senses, but also mediated through the mental sense. And then we can talk about the mind also being a continuum of moments of awareness. So when we're looking at a particular thing, when we're looking at our computer screen right now, then that is the experience that we're happening just in this moment. 10 minutes ago, half an hour ago, we were looking at something, hearing something, tasting something else. And so we were having other discrete mental events at that particular moment. And then there was this seamless transition between that moment and this moment. And an hour from now, we'll be doing something else. And there will continue to be this seamless transition between this moment and that moment. And yet in each moment of this continuity, there are these discrete moments of awareness where we are aware of objects in our visual field, our auditory field, our tactile field, and so on. And we're always developing sense impressions of all of these different objects of knowledge. And this is a river of mental events that is endless, beginningless and endless, according to the Buddhist view, that we can look at our own lives and we can say that it is a river of mental moments that has never ceased. Because Buddhism would say that when we're even when we're in deep sleep, there's still very, very subtle awareness that's happening. We may not have the ability to tap into that. We may not have a memory of it, but still the mind itself, even though it's become incredibly subtle, it's still operating. And of course, we know in the dream state, which is a little bit less subtle than that, then we have sensory data and we have mental sense activity. So we can say clearly that this stream of consciousness has operated for the entirety of this particular incarnation. And Buddhism would just simply say that that process extended to beginningless past lives, and it will extend into the future in endless future lives. And all of those, and that continuum is made up of these discrete individual experiences, moment to moment to moment. So this gets at the relationship between this understanding and then how we cultivate the mind in a particular direction. Buddhism would suggest that in a given day, for example, the more moments that we have in that day, the more individual, discrete mental moments that we have in that day where the mind is directed toward feelings or thoughts of ill will or jealousy or covetousness, the kind of disturbing attitudes that we've talked about, then that will leave kind of an impression, a momentum in the mind that will carry over into the next day. And we can even say 1 hour, 1/2 hour, one period of 5. And perhaps we can get a sense of that in this class, by thinking about maybe when we came into the class, we were maybe a bit, thinking about the day and a bit harried from work or things that we were, and then perhaps that 5 minutes of breathing meditation, we had a sense where the mind became a little bit more calm, a little bit more peaceful, a little bit more subtle and stable. So we can see how, immediately after that 5 minutes, perhaps we noticed that the mind had a slightly different character than it had 10, 15 minutes before. So that would be that sort of momentum, that impression that happened during that period that carried over. Now, unfortunately, of course, 1 5-minute period of meditation, 6, 7 hours later, has a pretty minor, impact. So we have to repeat these experiences. Buddhism would say that the more mental moments that we have in a day that are constructive, the more we are reinforcing what we want, the more that we're reinforcing moving the mind and cultivating the mind in a clear, stable direction toward the goal of what we are hoping for. And the reverse is also true. The more moments that we have in a day where the negative mental states are operating, then we're kind of moving away from the direction that we are hoping for. We're kind of moving in not such a great direction, because the mind, being a non-physical energy that develops awareness of what it's placed on, this process goes both ways. If we place the mind on virtuous objects again and again and again, then the mind will move in that direction. If we practice and cultivate and place the mind on non-virtuous objects, then that's the mind, that's the direction that the mind will go in. So the goal then is to really learn how to use meditation, use formal practice, and then to bring that into informal practice, so that slowly, gradually, over time, over years, over decades, we are kind of crowding out these not so positive states by focusing more and more on the virtuous states. Because we only have so many mental moments in a day, and if we can make the bulk of them virtuous and positive, then that's the course that the mind will take. And then that course will, just like, what we do in this 5 minutes has an impact in the next 5 minutes. What we do in this lifetime has an impact on the next lifetime. So if we can, the trick then, the goal is to really use as much of this lifetime as we can constructively to set ourselves up to move in a constructive direction in future lives. And, if we just take that as our working hypothesis, and then if we're wrong, because we have to say, well, I don't have direct experience, of this idea of past and future lifetimes. I don't have a memory of a past life. I don't have, other than the teachings, I don't have any basis for a view of a future life. But if we adopt this as our working hypothesis, then even if we're wrong, what is the harm? We've used this life to cultivate positive mental states, and that has had an impact, a positive impact within this life. And then if it doesn't have a positive impact beyond that, because maybe maybe this hypothesis isn't correct, then what? Then there's no disadvantage to that. Whereas if we take the hypothesis that definitely everything ends at death, and we're wrong about that, then we haven't used this life in the same way. I would just say that working hypothesis opens up doors that are closed if we don't have that hypothesis. We might take things a little bit more seriously. We might make a little bit more effort. We might, if we are open to the idea that that everything that we think and say and do in this lifetime carries over, and it isn't just lost automatically. So I kind of look at that as a hypothesis that opens up possibilities that would otherwise be closed. But let me pause, and anybody have a thought or a question so far about the way that understanding this model of the mind impacts meditation or practice?
That's good for me to think of the reincarnation as a working hypothesis, because logically I have a lot of trouble rationalizing it. But as a working hypothesis, it makes complete sense. That's a good
Yeah,
thought.
I mean, there have been a few people, who have tried to, like Dr. Ian Stevens, um, or Stevenson. I can never remember if it's Stevens or Stevenson, um, who, there've been people, there've been scientists and people who have written books who have tried to, validate past life memories, because, very few people do have past life memories, but there is a phenomenon of past life memories, and it tends to happen to young children, for whatever, they're closer to that past life at that time, being very young and maybe just starting to be able to verbalize. They're the, of course, they're the closest that you can be to that past life. And there's some small percentage that seem to have some memories. And then there have been researchers who have tried to validate those memories. And it appears that, to some degree, there are case studies that seem rather compelling, in terms of, specific memories of buildings being a certain way, the layout of a building, the color of a building, being remembered in a certain way, and then that building not being that way now, but actually being that way at the time that person said that they were alive. So, there are some case studies that seem compelling about that, and if even just one of those case studies is accurate, then something's going on, that is, pretty interesting, and kind of that. How could we explain that if it's true that the mind is just a function of the brain, and it comes into being at the moment of this life, and it is destroyed at the end of this life? How could it be that any of these case studies are, accurate in any way? So that, there are sort of more scientific approaches that we can look at in books and things. The University of Virginia has where Dr. Ian Stevens works. They have like a lab there that has looked at that. So there are people that have tried to validate that. Any other questions?
Well, Dondrub, my internet connection is unstable. I'm losing you every 5 minutes or more. And so I'm going to tune out. I just can't do it. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, it'll be on YouTube. So. Any other questions? No. So let's do another kind of exercise, another kind of meditative exercise. So this is called, and people may have done this before, this is called the 9-round breathing meditation or exercise. And it actually does come from originally kind of more of the esoteric teachings of the Buddha, where the Buddha taught on the subtle energy system of the body and mind. So what this is related to is the idea of the 3 channels, the 3 kind of main energy channels in the body and mind, through what's called the subtle energy body. That is, again, it's not, we visualize it as though it has some, not materiality, but as though it can be visualized energetically. So there is both a physical breathing component to this, and then there's also an accompanying visualization to go together. So the mental image, the visualization of this is, again, these three energetic channels that we try to hold in the mind. So these are visualized as tubes of light, and there'll be three of them. We start with what's called the central channel, and it's called that because it's in the middle of our body. It's central, it's in the middle of the physical body, and it begins at a point between the eyebrows, and we visualize it as being about the diameter of the little finger. So we visualize it just inside the skull, behind, the point between the eyebrows. Some people would call that the third eye. And so that's the opening there. And then it runs from that point up inside the skull, up to the crown of the head at the back, kind of like an umbrella handle. So kind of here, up, and then back. So kind of a bit like the handle of an umbrella, and then straight down from the top of the back of the head, in front of the spine, and it terminates at a point 4 finger widths below the navel, still inside the body, of course, directly in front of the spine. So, you can kind of just look at 4 finger widths and think of where your navel is, and then think inside the body, directly in front of the spine, is where that terminates. So that's the central channel, beginning here, running up, and then back, and then straight down, terminating 4 finger widths below the navel. To the right and the left of that central channel are called the right and the left channels. And we visualize these as slightly smaller in diameter than the central channel. And they begin in the nostrils. So the right channel begins in the right nostril, the left channel begins in the left nostril. And they too just run parallel. So they go, they begin here, and then they just run up again through the top of the back of the head on both sides, like this, and then again straight down. So you have these 3, and then they join at the bottommost point. They flow into each other. So the right and the left kind of hook into the central channel at that bottommost point. So these are hollow, thin, flexible, luminous, energetic tubes that carry energy, that carry the energy that the mind kind of rides on as it flows through the body. And they flow into each other at this bottommost point, again, 4 finger widths below the navel. Is that clear, that the way that we try to hold that visualization of all three channels. We try to hold that visualization in the mind as we engage in the breathing practice. Anyone have any questions about that? Is that clear?
You mean, Losang, you mean that the right and left breathing channels, they coalesce or come together in the back and in the front to the central channel?
So they run parallel to the central channel, and then at the point, so the central channel begins here. The right and the left channels begin in the nostrils, and then they each move up, kind of in, maintaining their relative positions. And then at the bottommost point, 4 finger widths below the navel, the right and the left kind of curve into and flow into the central channel. So they kind of curl up and into the central channel.
I see. Okay, thank you.
But they're separate. They're separate up until that point.
Okay. Then what is the purpose of visualizing this?
So it goes along with the breathing part of the meditation. So we try to hold this. We will be breathing into these channels. We'll be visualizing light coming into these channels, riding on the breath, and filling the central channel. And then this meditation is often done as a way of clearing away stale energies in the body and the mind, combining the visualization and the actual physical breathing. So this is often done as like a preliminary to meditation.
Okay, thank you.
And so Christine asks if this meditation relates to Kundalini yoga. So there's Kundalini has, I don't know a lot about it, but it's also an energetic practice, and it has to do it has more to do. I mean, these three channels. This is a very simplified. This particular visualization is a very simplified visualization. There are other visualizations. There are many other practices that are related more to the chakra system and these three channels in other visualizations in other systems are also related to the chakra system. This particular visualization doesn't utilize the chakra system. So it is a more simplified visualization. It's a more simplified practice that doesn't rely on an understanding of the chakra system directly, whereas Kundalini has more to do with raising the energies from the lower chakras up to the higher chakras. So they are both energetic practices, and so they're both relying on some understanding of the subtle energy system. But then, of course, yoga is also physical and, is also posture and other things. So it's a bit different. And then, of course, there are differences between, yoga is coming from the Hindu system, and there you have an understanding in the Hindu system also of the chakras, and you have an understanding of the chakras in the Buddhist system, and they're not always entirely exactly the same. They're different. And even in the Buddhist system, my understanding of kind of this trying to understand the chakra system is that because we're talking about a non-physical energy, we can't really talk about it as though it's always for all people in all ways actually, from the side of the mind, something that is in kind of like a fixed structure of some sort. It's more so that these structures can be, because there are different systems, because there are different chakra systems, we can't really say, well, that one system is the way that the mind actually is set up. It's kind of more so that they're helpful, that doing visualizations in different ways and working with the energies in different ways could be maybe more suitable for some people whose mind is a little, their karmic system is a little bit different than someone else's, and that maybe it leads to a different result, or it can be helpful for a particular purpose. But it has more to do with the relationship between intentionally directing the mind in a particular way and how that influences the result that you get out of the energetic system, rather than thinking of the energetic system as like definitely a fixed kind of thing that's exactly like this and it's only exactly like this. It's more like the relationship between what we do with our mind and how we direct our mind, and how that intentionally directing of the mind brings about specific results that are beneficial in specific ways. But I don't know enough specifically about Kundalini to give a more direct comparison. Yep. Okay. So we'll do this practice, and it's called 9 round, because what we'll do is we will use the right index finger. That's sort of normally what's used to close first the left nostril, and then we'll breathe 3 times in through just the right nostril, because the left nostril's physically blocked. So we'll do 3 inhalations through the right nostril, and then after the inhalation, we will release the left nostril and we will block the right nostril. So at the top, we'll do the inhalation through the right nostril. Then at the top of the inhalation, release the left nostril, close the right nostril, and exhale through the left nostril. So we're breathing in through one nostril and we're exhaling through the other. And we do that 3 times. We do 3 inhalations through the right, which means 3 exhalations through the left. Then we do the opposite. We close the right and we just do the reverse. Now we will breathe in 3 times through the left and we'll exhale 3 times through the right. And then we won't block either nostril and we'll breathe in through both and exhale through both. And we'll do that 3 times. So it's 3, 3, and 3, or 9 rounds of breathing, 3 total rounds of breathing, or I'm sorry, 9 total rounds of breathing in these, doing these 3 different things 3 times each. So a total of 9. So that's what we'll do. So just get in a comfortable, stable position. And we'll start just briefly by trying to hold that visualization of the central channel, beginning at a point between the eyebrows, curving up to the top of the back of the head, going down in front of the spine, and ending at a point 4 finger widths below the navel, in the middle of the body. Visualizing it as a thin, flexible, luminous tube of light. And then joining that with the right and the left channels. The right channel beginning in the right nostril, the left channel beginning in the left nostril. Also curving up to the top of the back of the head, going straight down, flanking the central channel on the right and left sides, and then bending in and flowing in to the central channel, 4 finger widths below the navel in the middle of the body. And the right and the left channels are just slightly smaller, so they sort of fit into the central channel. And all 3 of these are thin, flexible, luminous tubes of light. So as we do the practice, we just do our best to try to hold this visualization. So we'll gently close the left nostril, and then inhale through the right. And try to visualize this air following it down, following it through the right channel, all the way down and then when it reaches this bottommost point, we visualize that it flows into the left channel. All of these 3 channels are open at the bottom. So for this, we visualize that it flows into the left channel, and then we exhale. And we try to visualize that it moves up through the left channel and out the left nostril. And we just do that 2 more times. Okay. And then when you're ready, close the right nostril Breathe in through the left nostril, visualizing the air flowing through the left channel and filling the right channel at the bottom, flowing into and filling the right channel at the bottom. And then being expelled through the right channel 3 times. And then when you're ready for the last set of 3, we breathe normally through both nostrils, visualizing the air filling both channels, the right and the left. And then here on the exhalation, we visualize both the right and the left channels filling the central channel. And although we are exhaling, of course, through the nostrils, we try to visualize that air actually goes through the opening of the central channel between the eyebrows. So we try to hold that visualization during the exhalation. We just do that 3 times. And then on your own, just do one more set of the 9 round. All right. So you guys can finish up. Does anyone have any questions, thoughts about 9 round? So, of course, when it says 9 round, of course, that just means that one complete practice has the 9 rounds. You don't have to stop after you do 9 rounds. You know, you could do one complete set of the 9 rounds 2 or 3 times. Like I said, it's very, it can be very good to do that when the mind feels kind of stale or tired or stressed. It can be kind of rejuvenating. And one variation is also to visualize that air has like a kind of like a crystalline, purifying light to it, and that the exhalations are maybe like smog or smoke, kind of expelling, kind of giving it the sense of expelling negative or stale or, kind of polluted energies in that way. So you're kind of joining the visualization with this idea of bringing in positive, refreshing energy and expelling kind of stale negative energy by giving it, those sort of the visualization of like a crystalline purifying light and kind of like a smoke or a smog.
So when we do both, and then we visualize the thin slivers of light on each side, when we're reading them out, we're not reading into the central channel, because why would we want to read smoke into the central channel? Is that what you mean when we breathe it out?
No, that's the exhalation. So you're you would kind of have the sense that stale energy is kind of just already in your system. It's just sort of like what you're doing is you're doing this to get rid of it. So it isn't something that you are bringing in. It's just sort of like, your system is just kind of like not anything that's in your system that is kind of in that nature of stale or polluted energy. You just kind of visualize that it's sort of stuck in the central channels already, or it's kind of just already there, and you're replacing it. You're bringing in positive energy, and then sort of by definition, then your system is displacing that stale energy, and then it is only composed kind of by the end of that. You would think that you've completely displaced any of that stale energy, and now your system is only this positive energy.
Thank you.
Any other questions, thoughts? Okay. So we'll talk now a bit about different types of meditation that we have. So we can say, in terms of, particularly as I mentioned in last week's class, that our center is Christine. So if you just email me, Christine had a question. I don't know if you want to email me privately about your question about lay vows, and anybody can just email me. I'll put my email address in the chat. tnlsf.org. Yep. Anybody can, if you have a question about class or even just a question about anything, we will probably be offering at the center lay vows. Well, vows in generally have to be taken in person. That's just kind of a tradition in Buddhism. But so they're difficult to find online. Sometimes you can find some things online, particularly with the pandemic, like His Holiness has kind of loosened some things. But generally most teachers give vows in person. And I believe in the spring, June, July, we'll likely be offering vows at the center. So we'll talk about types of meditation. What we've done so far, breathing meditation, what we just did, we could call kind of like a visualization meditation, which you can say is a type of meditation. So in a way, you might think of it though as a subset, a visualization meditation as being, in a way, perhaps a subset of what's called analytical meditation. So broadly speaking, when we talk about meditation, we can talk about two types of meditation: analytical and stabilizing meditation. And if you go on our YouTube channel, if you want to, you can look for Dr. Nick just did a workshop on embodying the Buddha's wisdom, uniting analytical and stabilizing meditation. So that's on our YouTube channel. So it was a wonderful day-long workshop that he did. So we have these two main types of meditation. And in terms of Buddhist practice, we really need both. And as Dr. Nick pointed out, we really combine both within analytical meditation. But when we say analytical meditation, that phrase might be new to people. And it is something that is particularly emphasized in Tibetan Buddhism as a vehicle for inner transformation. That's sort of the point of meditation, is inner transformation. And I would say in one way, the main vehicle for that is analytical meditation. And what I mean by analytical meditation is that we might have a misconception. In the West, it's quite common for people to think that meditation is only breathing meditation. That meditation is, because breathing meditation is the other kind of meditation, the other type, which is what I would call stabilizing meditation, where and these two are different in that analytical meditation involves intentionally following a chain of reasoning or a chain of logic or a chain of argumentation that is trying to lead us to arrive at an insight about a topic. So, for example, one of the early topics in Buddhism is what's called precious human rebirth. And the purpose of this topic is for us to understand that we possess a precious or perfect human rebirth. And there are 18 specific qualities that characterize a precious human rebirth. And this insight is very powerful in helping us to kind of overcome our natural tendency to kind of look at the world and be like, well, there's 8 billion other humans, so human life is kind of, easy, and it's just sort of ubiquitous, and certainly I'll get another human lifetime, and it's not really that big of a deal. But really, when you think of, in this particular this particular insight, these 18 different qualities, when you think about all of the causes and conditions that come together to create what is actually a really unique and really rare and particularly incredibly beneficial vehicle for spiritual growth and development compared to the other kinds of existences that exist in, kind of all of reality, then that insight helps a person to not take their life for granted, to really see that what they have is something that they need to use wisely, they need to use constructively, they need to use in service of creating the causes and the conditions for spiritual growth and development, and not just kind of think of it as this super ordinary thing that everybody has and just not that big of a deal. So when a person is meditating on precious human rebirth, then they're literally going through these 18 different qualities. In one way, this analytical meditation does depend on study, because of course you can't meditate on the 18 qualities of a precious human rebirth without knowing what they are. And it's also helpful to do some memorization, because eventually you want to be able to recollect the 18 qualities without having to refer back to a piece of paper. You want to be able to have your eyes, kind of mostly closed, and you want to maintain the meditative posture. So that means that as you're going through these 18 qualities, you don't have to refer to something in front of you. And this is true of the meditation on impermanence, all of the different contemplations that a person does. So a person literally goes through the first, the second, and so on. And the goal is to give rise to a really strong felt sense that I myself possess a precious human rebirth, that I've demonstrated by going through all of these lines of reasoning, these lines of analysis, that I, in fact, do possess a precious human rebirth that ought not be wasted, that ought not be used to create negativity, that ought not be used frivolously. And once we then go through those lines of analysis and we have that kind of visceral felt sense, then the stabilizing part of that comes into play. We try to hold our mind on that sense, on that experience of that insight. So we use the analysis to give rise to the insight. And the insight is the point of the analysis. And then we let go of the analysis and we hold the mind single-pointedly, if possible, on that insight. And of course, what we will find, because we're new to meditation and, or even if we've been meditating for a few years, relatively, we're still new. What we'll find is that, of course, we have to deal with distraction. We have to deal with distraction during the analysis part. And then we have to deal with distraction even once we have some sense of that insight. We're going to get distracted throughout the whole series of these contemplations. And so we may completely lose that, at any point, we may completely, as Venerable Robina says, completely lose the plot. Like, what was I meditating on again? Like, was it precious human rebirth? Oh, right, that's what it was. And which of the 18 qualities was I trying to think about? We might get totally swept away by this fight that we had, or thinking of something we would rather be doing, and just totally the actual intended object is just nowhere in the mind. Or it could be a little bit lighter of a distraction. It could be where we had a relatively good sense of the object, and then we just kind of slightly move to something else. But we find that it's kind of easy to just redirect, to just kind of move back to that, to what we intended to be focused on. It can really be anywhere in between those kind of extremes in terms of how intense and how how strong the distraction was, how long it lasted, that sort of thing. But distraction will be something that we have to deal with throughout both stages of this meditation. But an analytical meditation does have these two stages where there's an active analytical phase to the session. And so what I'm describing is a single, say, 10 or 15 minute session of meditation. The first 10 minutes, let's say, is set aside for going through the lines of analysis. And that is meant to give rise to this insight. And then the last 5 minutes is meant to be single-pointedly holding the mind in this sense of the insight. But of course, as I said, what we don't have control over is the role that distraction is going to play in that process. But that's kind of the general idea. That's the general format. And then something like a breathing meditation. So the idea when we say stabilizing, what we mean is that there's a single object that we don't have to, that's been generated, that we don't have to actively generate because it's already been generated. So the insight, when we get to the insight portion of an analytical meditation, we then just stabilize the mind on that because we've generated it. The breath is an example also of something that we don't have to generate. That's I would say that's a purely stabilizing meditation, because there isn't a point during that meditation where we have to do anything to create the object, because the object is just a physical sensation and we're breathing already. So in theory, for a breathing meditation, we can hold the mind to the object without distraction for the entire length of the 10 or 15 minutes. In theory, of course, that's not our experience because we're not good at meditation. But the people who are incredible meditators, that is what they can do. They, for that whole 10 or 15 minutes, only the physical sensation of the breath is arising in their mind. But for us, that's our goal, but there's all kinds of distractions arising in our mind. So stabilizing comes into play when the object is generated, and analysis comes into play when the object is being generated. Some objects require thought, require words to generate. Other objects are physical in nature and they don't require words to generate. So a complete practice then, not only, I would say, because an analytical meditation has those two stages to it, whereas a breathing meditation kind of just has the one stage. A complete practice then involves sessions both of analyzing meditation and stabilizing or single-pointed meditation. And by that I mean that in a week, a person, to have a well-rounded practice, a person would do a number of sessions that were analytical in nature and a number of sessions that were purely single-pointed in nature. Again, perhaps on the breath as an example. And the reason that a person to have that well-rounded practice would do both is because when the session doesn't have an analytical component, that session is again, in theory, perhaps a little bit more well suited to helping us to make progress on the goal of being able to really, really effectively concentrate the mind on a chosen object. Because all we're dealing with in that kind of meditation are the distractions. Whereas with an analytical meditation, we have a section of that where there is intentional discursiveness of mind. When we're contemplating the 18 qualities of a precious human rebirth, the mind is active. The mind, it's really a specialized form of thinking. We're not, and it's specialized because we're telling ourselves that this is all I'm going to do. When distraction arises, I'm going to notice distraction and I'm going to bring my mind back. I'm not going to indulge in distraction. I'm not going to just get up and go do something else. I'm not going to intentionally think about something else. I'm going to bring my mind back again and again. So it's specialized in that way. Whereas normally we do tolerate distraction. Normally, when another thought arises, we just go and indulge and do that other thing. Whereas when we're meditating, the difference is we don't do that other thing on purpose. We do sometimes do that other thing because it's such a powerful distraction that we don't have any choice, but we don't do it on purpose. So then what I would say is that a breathing meditation is devoid of a period of intentional discursiveness of mind. There's unintentional discursiveness of mind because the distractions are so prevalent. But an analytical meditation has a section where the mind is meant to be active, and we're not doing anything wrong with that. That's what we're supposed to be doing, as long as it's the actual topic that we've chosen for that session, like the 18 qualities of a precious human rebirth. So if in our practice in general, we include sessions that are devoid of that intentional discursiveness, then the theory is we will make more rapid progress to developing highly refined states of concentration than we otherwise would if all we did was analytical meditation, because analytical meditation has that intentional discursiveness. And if we sometimes get rid of that, we'll make more rapid progress with the skill of concentrating the mind. So they're both important. They're both used in analytical meditation, but when they're used separately, stabilizing or single-pointed meditation as its own practice brings something really important to our practice in general, if we think about it in terms of like a whole week or a whole month, like that. So it's just to say that we need sessions of both in a week or in a month to have a very well-rounded practice. I know that's a lot. Any thoughts or questions?
With analytical meditation, can we meditate on anything that might lead to a favorable balance?
The short answer is yes. So the goal, so I said in the first session, we said that meditation is to concentrate the mind on a virtuous object. So anything that helps us to familiarize our mind with a virtuous object, that we can take that as a session of meditation. It's a little bit outside the scope of this class to talk about what's called the Lam Rim, but what I would say is that for traditional historical Buddhist practitioners, the material of analytical meditation is drawn predominantly from what's called the Lam Rim, or the stages of the path to enlightenment. This is where all of these topics have been condensed from the original sutra material, which is thousands and thousands and thousands of pages, most of which are, not necessarily easily available even in English. The Lam Rim was an effort a later effort, an effort by scholars and practitioners who came after the Buddha to look at the sutra material and condense it and make it accessible for practitioners. So that for most Buddhist practitioners, most Tibetan Buddhist practitioners, they use Lam Rim material to guide their analytical meditations. If a person feels, and I would say that is a bit, a person doesn't need to start with Lam Rim. Of course, a person can do a few months, a year of more general things. The two really general books that I like to start with are How to Meditate by Kathleen MacDonald, and Awakening the Kind Heart by Kathleen MacDonald. Those are very general books. And that's kind of, me personally, that's kind of where I would start. Work with those for a while. If a person has started or they feel ready to move into Lam Rim, then I like Yangtze Rinpoche's Practicing the Path as a place to start. It's definitely more scholarly, more academic. Again, because there's a whole chapter on precious human rebirth. There's a whole chapter on impermanence. All of these major themes that the Buddha taught are given chapters, and they're supported by primary source material and all kinds of things. Broadly speaking, Buddhist practitioners go into that at some point. But, to your point, just bringing someone to mind and thinking, may you be well, may you be at ease, may you be free of suffering. That's a wonderful meditation, a loving kindness meditation. So there's all kinds of meditations. The more traditional, more academic is Lam Rim. And again, in English, Lam Rim translates into stages of the path to enlightenment.
Thank you.
Yep. Any other questions, thoughts, questions? Okay, well, we'll leave it there. If people would like a bit of homework for the next week, on the event page, the materials link, go to the handout that is called Mind Like the Sky, and do that meditation over this next week. Do the Mind Like the Sky meditation, and then we'll talk about that. when we start next week. So let's just briefly dedicate then. So at the beginning of the class, we said a virtuous motivation, and now we'll dedicate the energy that we've created, actualizing that motivation. So we think that by studying, by listening, contemplating, to actualize our virtuous motivation, we've created positive energy in the mind, and we offer the fruit of that energy for the benefit of others. So just have a sense, cultivate a sense of giving away, offering your efforts, your time, your energy for the benefit of others. Just not holding on to it at all. All right. Well, thanks everyone for coming.